I just wanted to briefly mull over this process. I haven't yet made these recordings available online. I'm going to do that this weekend. It's Friday of my first week's attempt. And in reviewing a number of the later files that I collected, I discovered that the keyboard became invisible. In other words, my camera got knocked off its course just ever so slightly. So there's an awful lot of stuff going on just under your sight lines. I think you might find that in spite of the fact that when I'm suggesting I'm demonstrating something, that something is actually happening, at least I'm using words to try to describe it. You're not getting a very good example, other than a fairly decent view of my head and shoulders and the like, of what's happening at the keyboard. And I will try to rectify that. But it does amuse me in that the rules of pianist thumbs that I use constantly, my sets of ever-growing aphorisms or maxims about how you can make decisions at the keyboard and in life and various things, that something as simple as look through the camera before you start recording and see if you see the keyboard. If you don't see the keyboard, the chances are very, very great that the camera won't pick up the keyboard during its recording. So that's become, for this project, one of my new aphorisms, one of my new rules of pianist thumbs. Look through the viewfinder or look at the screen and see whether or not the shot that you see is more or less aligned with what it's supposed to be aligned with. So it has nothing to do with music, but in a way it does, because it's all those obvious things that get unstated that are important to state. I think I use the analogy with my students that if you have a long grocery list and you go into a grocery store, the list is in your head, it's the obvious things that you often forget to pick up, like if milk or water or whatever tends to be at the top of your list, you'll be thinking of all the exotic things you have to pick up, but the simple things you won't, which is why we use checklists for packing for a trip. If you don't consult your checklist, you might forget your toothbrush or something else like that. I will tell on myself, because everything that I do at the piano I like to relate to the rest of my life. My wife and I were going on a trip. I was very organized. I put my bags in the trunk, and then a few minutes later we drove off to the parking lot where we were going to park. And we opened the trunk and there was nothing there because I had put the bags in a different car. So now that's on my checklist. Always put the bags in the car that you're going to park. Otherwise you run the risk of getting to the airport and not having your bags. So I think a lot of learning how to play stuff or develop a refined skill involves noticing the ordinary, the things that you have to do, the things that are commonsensical and so fall under your view typically because they're so commonsensical. They're such a relevant and significant and yet understated part of the process that you don't bother to state them. And I think that's important, particularly in dealing with frustration. And I have to say that one of the number one ways in which I can be helpful as a teacher is to help alleviate frustration. And often I notice that the patience that I show in dealing with frustration and overcoming it is not the same patience I show in practicing for myself. So I have to be reminded that the principles that I share are the principles I share with myself as well. It helps me because I'm talking to you that, in essence, although I don't see you, I recognize that you're there. So it doesn't make me feel bad that I'm talking to myself. And therefore I get to hear myself. I get to hear my own voice articulating particular concepts that I might otherwise not do. So there you go. I'm going to stop this recording and then start with the next segment of the Schumann Quintet in a moment. Thanks.